I am going to try and uncover every question you have ever had on markets. If you're a small business or a hand maker and you are just starting out trying to figure out what markets to apply to, where to even find them, this video is for you. I hope I can answer all of your questions. If you're new here, my name's Caitlin. I make videos about small business, growing your small business, helping you scale that business to have it become your full-time job if that's what you so choose. We are going to talk all about markets, and I have so much information. I'm actually going to break this up into a few different videos. So keep your eyes peeled for a few new segments on markets, but today's video we're going to talk all about how to even find markets, which ones to do, how to know which ones to do, all of that. Most likely you're going to want to start looking for markets close to you. You may already know of some because you've gone to them as a customer, so those are great places to start. If you haven't though, Google will be your best friend. There are a ton of websites out there that just compile all different kinds of markets. Instagram is also another great one. I'm sure you have other vendor friends or people that are in your area that sell handmade goods. Everyone always tags themselves in their booth or at their display at each market. You can find a lot of information just by doing some simple Google searches. So that's usually not the hard part though. Finding the markets isn't that hard. The hard part is knowing which ones are right for you and your business. So I have a couple tips that you can implement, hopefully figure out which ones are good for you. Side note, you're gonna have some bad experiences. I did, I think everyone does. You're gonna have a market or two that just aren't gonna pan out well for you, and that's just the name of the game. So going into this with that mindset, that not every market is going to be the perfect fit for you. However, there are definitely things you can do to weed out some of those markets that might not be the best fit. Okay, so my first tip would be to talk to other local makers. Yes, I told you to look at their Instagrams to find these markets, but I would just start building some relationships with other people that are in those circles. You'd be surprised how much information some people are willing to give. You will find people who won't, but I have found that the handmade community is super supportive and very collaborative, and I have really been able to build some great relationships with other makers in a completely different space than soap making. I make soap. So I would go to those people first to find out what might be their favorite markets, which ones they find the most successful. And then there's always going to a market. So I actually scouted out a market this past weekend and I took some footage for you, but I wanted to see what it was all about. It was their first event ever. It was called Bloom. It's totally fit into the vibe of my business, but I did look and see they had a ton of soap vendors. So when it was time to apply, I really didn't feel like it would be worth it for me because A, it's a little bit risky with it being their first event, and B, they had already let in quite a few soap makers and it just felt like maybe it was a little oversaturated. Either way, I went as a consumer to scout it out, but also just have fun because I love supporting other businesses. So now I know it might be worth it, but there have definitely been situations where I've gone to an event just cold, not ever going as a customer, put my money into it, and it's not been that great. So if you're a little bit hesitant or on the fence, I would absolutely go to some of these events in person by yourself and just scout it out and see if your ideal customer is even there. You can look at the other customers, look at the other vendors, and start to piece things together of, is that your ideal client and are they here? If they are, and there's a lot of foot traffic, usually those two things make for a very successful market. One thing to note on markets, there is kind of a calendar. So for the most part, January through March, depending upon where you are in the country, I know I'm in Boston, so January through March is a time period where we really don't have a lot of markets and you're not gonna get the biggest bang for your buck. You may do farmers markets, which I have done during that time period, and we'll get to that a little bit later and the different kinds of markets, but overall, there is definitely a season, and honestly, Jan through March is coming right off of the holidays anyway. You're not really gonna get a lot of customers who are in the mood to shop. I think April through September is the core for most places in the country of these markets, and then of course there's always holiday, which is a completely different beast in and of itself, but I would almost give yourself a break January through March, especially if you're starting out. I wouldn't really suggest starting in those months because you're probably gonna get a bad taste in your mouth and it's just not going to be worth your while. I would absolutely wait for the springtime and summertime when people are a little bit more apt to spend money. As you're doing your search, you're gonna find that their price points for markets range anywhere from, some of them are free, but most of them are around $10, $25 for the smaller markets, and some are upwards of $500. I've even seen some of $1,000. And you're gonna probably have a little sticker shock for some of them, but that's why doing your research beforehand is super beneficial. You don't wanna spend a lot of money and wind up not having a great show if you haven't done the research before. More expensive and bigger and fancier doesn't always mean better. And I'm gonna share with you a little story. So like I said, I live in the Boston area and we have an amazing market called SOA. It's in Boston. They run every Sunday and it's amazing. It's right in the city, and the vibe and the food trucks and the beer garden and the other vendors, it's totally my clientele. And this was before the pandemic I did this, but I signed up and I believe I had maybe 2 events there. And then I ended up canceling my other few events because the cost was around $85 for the day. It was on a Sunday from 8 to 4 were the event times, which that meant I had to be there at least 7 a.m. But because it's Boston, I left even earlier. So most of the time I got there at 6:30, 6 a.m. And you have to wait until the event is completely over at 4 to pack up. So my day was probably from 6 to 6 on a Sunday, and I was also working full time. So I was giving up my entire Sunday, and I barely made $100 both times. There was a ton of foot traffic. It's in one of the biggest cities in the world. People were coming into my booth, but here were some of the problems. The majority of customers were tourists. So they were very particular about what they were buying, and I was selling a lot of soap and things in jars that would be difficult to transport back. There were also a lot of people there that went to SOA because of the food trucks and the farmers market and the beer garden. So they were just trying to spend a nice Sunday, but really ultimately going for food, and they weren't in the mood to shop. This was a big learning for me because when I look at this event on Instagram and on their website, it looks gorgeous, amazing. Trust me, I was so excited I got accepted in because it is juried, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It was very eye-opening to me that this beautiful, big, fancy market was something I made less money at than my local farmers market that year. So just keep that in mind, that these shinier things don't always mean that you're guaranteed to make more money. And by the way, markets there's no guarantee with how much you're gonna make. So like I said in the beginning, we all have good markets and we all will go to some bad markets. Okay, I mentioned juried. What does juried mean? Basically, it's a fancy word for that you have to apply, and it's not a first come first serve basis or a farmer's market type situation. So a juried market means you're gonna apply, you usually give your social media handles, your website, you tell them what you're gonna be selling, a little bit about you maybe, and the jury or the event managers are going to take all these applications and boil it down to how many spots they have, and they're going to curate the market. This is actually really beneficial because what it means is they're going to pick vendors that they align with, that they think will be successful, but they are also going to manage how many. So for instance, the event that I had gone to this past weekend, there were a ton of soap makers and cosmetic makers and candle makers. Well, they probably let in too many in my opinion, which oversaturates it, not only for the vendors, but the customers. If a customer is coming to a market and they are buying a ticket, which they did for this market, they don't want to walk in and only find soap and candles if it's been marketed to be this very eclectic flower garden type show, which is what it was. And I think the vendors seemed very happy with the turnout, but I did have to wait in line for a while before I could get in, and I noticed a ton of people leaving without buying anything. So don't be scared if it says juried. It's not really as scary as it sounds, but it just means that they're going to apply and see if you're the right fit. So I would just apply to the ones that you've done your research on that you think would be a good fit. And most of the time, if there's enough spaces available, they'll let you in. The other thing about a juried market, they're usually better because they are curated, which also means that they've got more food, maybe a cocktail or beverage truck or something like that, a lot of live music. They're creating more of an event versus just a craft fair or a market, like a farmer's market. And I find that the foot traffic is always better. They advertise a lot more. They have more budgets behind it. So the benefits to the vendors are much greater than if you were doing a more local craft fair type situation. So just keep that in mind too, that the price tag of those is usually higher, but it's because they're doing all of this other stuff on the back end and they're working to get as much foot traffic as possible. So hopefully that just results in bigger crowds and more sales for you. Okay, I kind of mentioned it, but prices of markets. Okay, this is a tough one because I know a lot of you are just starting out, and when you see a market that is in the hundreds of dollars for a day or a weekend, it can be a little bit shocking to see that price tag and have to pay that up front. I will tell you that my most successful markets are the ones that are a little bit more expensive for a lot of the reasons why I just explained. A juried market is great. Those are usually more expensive, like I said, and therefore you are going to get more sales. So for instance, one of the past markets that I did, my last market I did was last June, and it was $375 for a 10 by 10 booth. It was a weekend long Saturday and Sunday market, and it was one that I'd done for quite a few years, so I had already kind of gotten my feet wet with it. I knew what to expect, but each year my sales were going up and up. So on that market, it was coming during the pandemic, so I really didn't know what to expect. It was June 2021, and it was a good market, and I sold $3,000. So if that just gives you perspective, like I said, everyone's numbers are gonna be different, but just note that that $375 did generate $3,000 worth of sales. Now there are a lot of other factors besides just those two numbers that go into your profitability, but those higher priced markets oftentimes do tend to give you more customers and more sales. In a spot where you can't shell out a couple $100s, then totally just stick to some of the smaller ones. They're great. Every market is going to be a great experience for you, and you're going to learn more about your customers. And personally, I've gone to some markets where I've sold at a farmer's market, I've sold to 1 or 2 customers, but those customers are now customers that have come back repeatedly, and their sales over the 3 years time period is amazing. So in my mind, those 2 sales that I got on that day, yeah, I wasn't, you know, killing it and making tons of money at that day at that particular market, but what I've made off of that market in the long run has actually benefited me. So don't think that I'm trying to knock the smaller markets, because all of them have their own benefits. Another question I got from one of you guys was, how many markets should I do in a year? I have a friend who runs a jewelry business, and she tells me that she goes to 60 markets a year. She also has a team of people that go for her, so it makes it a little bit easier to do that. I say stick with what you think is reasonable. You do not want to be killing yourself. I know a lot of you are probably doing this as a side hustle, so your weekends are dedicated to your business, and you also have to have time to make the products and do your own online sales and things like that. So if you're just starting out, I would say try to do at least 2 a month, because in my opinion, growing a business online is very difficult, especially if you're just starting out. Yes, social media is huge, but if you want to generate cash quickly, in-person markets, in my opinion, in the beginning, are super beneficial for you. You're going to get your product out there. You're going to get feedback from customers directly in front of you. You can have great conversations with them and learn so much. So I would say do what you think you can do, but more is always better in the first year. Don't try and strive for the 60. I think that's completely crazy. She's been in business for like 8 years, so don't compare yourself to her. But just know that there are a lot of vendors in our space that do a market every single weekend, and that's their gig. That's where they get the bulk of their business from. But if you're just starting out, I would say try as many as you can. So now that I kind of walked you guys through how you can do some research and figure out what markets might be best for you, I'll just give you a little bit of information around what ones work for me specifically. I do sell soap and cosmetics, So the best ones for me have been my weekend-long markets that I had around here in New England. I really haven't traveled far past New England because I'm building my customer base here. But the weekend-long market that I mentioned that was $375, that's been my best market to date so far. I did do some farmers markets, which were really beneficial, and the one complaint I have about farmers markets, at least in my area, is they don't let you come weekly. So my struggle with that is I want to be consistent and I want to build my brand and have repeat customers. And I'm not so sure customers were coming to these farmers markets for me because my schedule was so sporadic. It wasn't even every other week. It would be sometimes 2 weeks in a row, and it was just very difficult for customers to know where I was. And I honestly think a lot of people go to the farmers market for their groceries and their flowers and those lovely things that we love farmers markets for. But I'm not sure that they go and buy soap from one particular person. I think they go and they buy soap from whoever's there. So I guess what I'm trying to say is if you're trying to build a brand like I was finding that it wasn't super beneficial. I was selling stuff and I was probably averaging around $200 a day at those farmers markets, but I wasn't building a customer base the way I wanted to. So I had pulled back from farmers markets quite a bit. The other market that I did, which was absolutely atrocious, was a local market at a high school, and it happened to be in December, and so I thought, okay, I think it was $20 to enter or to get a table, and it was awful. I don't even think I sold one thing. I honestly can't remember because it just wasn't my clientele, and that's why I'm saying do the research. So there was tons of traffic, but it was a lot of older women who were looking for more Christmas specific stuff. I had a woman next to me who was selling these coasters that she had just epoxied like a meme onto, and she was selling a ton. So great for her, but that's not my customer, and our customers don't align, and she clearly knew where to find her customers, and she was making an absolute killing. But I was standing there with my nice little display and I sold nothing. So I would just say, like, again, do your research. You'll save yourself some time. Those are just the things that worked for me and my business, and of course they're different by every area. I actually have given up markets completely. I have been able to build my online business so strong that there were points where I would be selling more online while I was sitting at a farmer's market, not selling as much. And I made the decision to shift over and really start to keep pushing my online business, and it was no longer as beneficial for me to do the market. So make sure you check back next week for the next video. I am going to talk about everything you need to buy and bring to the market. I have some great tips there, and I'm also going to talk to you about your booth display and design, and then we're going to talk about the 10 things that you should not do at a market. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.